Greetings, everyone. Greetings. Peace and blessings to all. Peace and blessings to all. And thank you for tuning in to another podcast. I guess I was trying to let the music fade out a little bit. Probably should have waited a little bit longer. Since this is one of my favorite intro tunes. So, once again, everybody, peace and blessings. Derron Black with the Black Report. I typically have my introduction in front of me, but I don't have it in front of me today. So, you're going to have to forgive me. And bear with me, because as always, or at least for myself, man, things are always happening. A lot of different things going on. I'm always trying to juggle life and also trying to be conscious of my commitment to give. You know, me and my wife was having this conversation not too long ago where I, expressed to her my passion to give. And I know that to be enabled to give, you have to have something to give. And so I know for myself, I'm always trying to fill up my cup. I think that it's critical that, at least for myself, I engage in the things that are going to be fulfilling and that is going to increase me not only in my knowledge, but also in my actions and my behavior, because I struggle with a lot. And one of the things that I have found to help me get through some of the struggles that I have is having a huge sense of accountability. I think it is disappointing to a degree how some people, let me just make it in terms where, it's not something that's like an absolute or anything like that. But some people, including myself, sometimes we don't want to hold ourselves accountable. It's easier not to hold yourself accountable, or at least it's perceived to be easier, because you start to develop a consciousness that isn't too aware. And when you're not aware, then it allows you to, in some ways, suppress things of importance, and you become good at it. And again, I haven't always been a person that wanted to hold myself accountable. So I used to have a very quick, I guess, for lack of a better expression, a toilet flush mechanism where the information or the circumstance could be there at one moment, and then I could just, completely make it disappear the next. And trying to keep myself in a state where I'm not conscious of certain things, or I'm not conscious of certain actions, allowed me to engage in more things that I probably shouldn't necessarily be engaging in, because I didn't have, too much of a reservoir, I guess, of negative or, traumatic emotions, because I would just try to get rid of it as quickly as possible. But that wasn't the most healthiest thing for me to do. I promise you it wasn't. And it probably didn't come out until years later in my life. As I think back on my life, being at the grand old age of 42 now, that suppressing certain memories and suppressing, certain experiences that I had in my life was not healthy for me over the long run. So if it wasn't going to be healthy for me over the long run, then why even attempt to engage in it in the short or the near term? So one of the things that I had to learn is just start to deal with things. And when you deal with things, you have to have a level of accountability, and you have to have a level of awareness, to help you to be responsible. And always one of the things that I do is I always talk about the books, and one of the books that helped me to embrace this understanding is the the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. And I highly recommend anybody who is listening to me right now, if you haven't read that book, go pick that book up. As a matter of fact, I have that book. I've given the book away, to I don't know how many folks in my life. But I think I'm even going to pick that book up again because, again, like I said before, one of the things that I have found to be essential in my life and for my experience is for me to give. And for me to be able to give, I also have to make sure that I have something to give. And one of the ways that I keep that cup filled is, of course, taking in good information. And so that Franklin Covey book, or Stephen Covey book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, one of the things that it talks about in the book is that to be proactive, we have to remember that we have a space between the stimulus and the response. And that space right there, if you're a person of, of a religious persuasion, you might, of course, see that space as being the soul. Or it's all the soul. But that space really that you have between your stimulus and your response, that's where your consciousness has the opportunity to engage. Now, for some of us, like I said, myself included, I didn't necessarily want to believe that that space exists because, it allows you to do things that you probably wouldn't have done if you put some thought into it. But since you try to marginalize or shrink that space, like I said, like I used to do, then it becomes easier for you to for you to engage in things that probably you shouldn't necessarily be engaging in. And over the long term, those things start to add up. And so recognizing that that space is there, it gives you what's called agency. And it gives you agency because you have the opportunity to use your consciousness based off of the stimulus that you might be receiving in your environment to create the responses that will be more appropriate for, the situation and the circumstance that you might be dealing with at the moment, right? I guess for a lot of us that don't engage in that space, they would say that we're pretty much operating off of a emotional type behavior, because that's really where you get the emotional reactions that you probably weren't necessarily counting on happening when you don't engage that space, and all of a sudden it becomes stimulus and response. Well, those are pretty detrimental to learn long-term building, growth, and development, or at least it's been for me in my life. I don't know. Maybe you have some suggestions, and you can, send me a line on what your suggestions have been. Because again, like I said, I'm always trying to improve and better myself. So I would be interested in how people, or people that I don't know of, or dealing with their mental health, because I think that's what's a lot of these things, or a lot of these topics are related to nowadays. But like I said before, people who are of a spiritual persuasion in the background, they might see all these things on the level of the soul, because it's not to say that you don't have to look at it that way, because you don't. Like I said before, if you want to look at the secular language for it, then, be free to pick up Franklin Covey's book and read The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and you'll see where the gentleman, I think his name is Viktor Frankl, who was a Holocaust survivor. And Viktor Frankl is referenced in The 7 Habits because Frankl, in his experience, very traumatic experience, dealing with the Holocaust or being in a concentration camp. I think he survived the concentration camp. But he talked about the freedom that he was able to create for himself while being in a concentration camp. Now, that requires a level of personal control that, I'm still trying to get a quarter to, because if you could just imagine the type of day-to-day trauma that you experience, minute by minute, moment by moment trauma that you experience by being in a Holocaust that Holocaust environment, being in a Jewish, concentration camp, man, that would be one of the most difficult and challenging experiences that anybody could ever imagine or can ever think of. I know, others probably will come with, some other type ones, but it that at least has to rank up there with being, I can't even find the words. But anyway, yeah, it's pretty traumatic. But this gentleman, Viktor Frankl, demonstrated how he was able to find freedom by understanding that he could control how he responded to the environment that he was in, and still wanted to exercise agency and exercise a level of freedom that he believed that he could muster in that difficult circumstance. And so that was inspiring to me, man, when I was trying to get myself together and get myself on a road where I felt that, I could have some longevity into my life as well. Because as a child, I think that's something that has to be cultivated, and it has to be instilled in us. And that's the notion that, your life exists farther than, what it is that you can see at the moment. or if you aspire to have a life that, extends, further than what you can see at the moment, then you have to start taking accountability for the actions that you're doing at the moment, because it's those actions that form into the habits, and those habits form into your personality, and it becomes who you are. And so when I wanted to pull myself together and realize that I could do a lot more by developing a consciousness about my actions, as opposed to the automatic stimulus and response, then life became a lot more rewarding. It really did. It's empowering to know that you can hold your life in your own hands. Don't get me wrong. You have to, of course, have very, very strong anchors, in my belief, in spirituality, or, of course, my expression of spirituality is through my religion of Islam. And Islam has been an excellent tool for me. Hopefully you don't think that I ascribe to what's considered to be Islam, which is a whole nother conversation. And, a matter of fact, I'm gonna make a note of that, because I don't think enough of that conversation has been taking place. But anyway, you anchor yourself in a strong foundation of morals, values, and principles, and you realize that based off of those precepts, then life becomes very beautiful in a sense, right? You start to see the or at least for me, I started to see the multiple dimensions of the world that I live in, because I started to understand that I have a proper measurement device. All good scientists and all good people who like to study the natural world, if you pay attention to some of their actions, or if you pay attention to how they go about understanding the world, then you'll find, or at least I've come to find, that a lot of them have a way of seeing things. And their way of seeing things, allows them to define things in a way that have sometimes been beneficial for them and sometimes not. I know, like I said before, I didn't think at one point in my life that it was necessary to have certain values, principles, and morals to be at the forefront of my life all the time, because I didn't think that that's what the world really operated on or really revolved around, and that's really what's in danger right now, and what always, again, drives me and motivates me to want to make my contribution and do things like, this podcast and running for office, and, the community engagement that I try to build my life around, through my business and through my profession. It's again, because I wanted to place myself in the space that has been given to me, by, divine engineering. Life has become a lot more rewarding, and life can be very, very much so rewarding if we do place ourselves as the accountable agents that we have, and we strive to make a better place than what it is that we were given. Then, you see all different types of miracles that really start to take place, because you start to understand, or at least you should start to understand, that the order is not necessarily the given. The chaos is the given. It doesn't take much to destroy something, but it takes a lifetime sometimes to build things of significance and of value. And all of us are unique in our own special ways. And so to let me rewind it back, at least for me, right? Because I'm always trying to maintain that balance as well. I know everybody doesn't necessarily ascribe to certain visions, and that's okay. And I really want to double down on saying that that's okay, especially, like I said before, it's probably a conversation that I should put at the forefront as far as what the perception of Islam is for people who are not of the Islamic faith, and potentially even for people who claim to be a part of the Islamic faith. I operate on a level of seeing everyone in life, of course, associated with different communities and different institutions, but also you're an individual, and regardless of what our circumstances may be, in this world, sharing this world together, we all have to share it, or we all have to share and occupy our spaces as individuals. Some people have a problem with that. Others see it as a hindrance to what they believe to be the better things in life or more important things in life that we should focus on. But what could be more important than the human drama, than humanity itself, right? But of course, this is me jumping off into my politics now. And as you probably know, or if you've been following me up until this point, then you do know that, I no longer see things through the Democratic lens anymore. That I feel that I have removed my blinders, and that I was conditioned and groomed from an environment that placed me in Democratic politics or in the hands of the Democratic ideology. And I didn't even know how that ideology or that persuasion, affected so many different things that have significant effects on our lives that I wasn't even conscious of. And so now, being aware of those things, right, I've actually found it easier to engage in politics. I've actually found it easier to get to a level of truth that I'm comfortable with, that doesn't seem so confusing and convoluted, because I'm being anchored down by, things that are totally dysfunctional, when you try to rationalize it and come to a resolution of how these things are ultimately supposed to take effect in your day-to-day life, right? And so, again, I'm saying all this because, one, I'm always trying to improve my situation and trying to make myself better. And one of the ways that I have found that I can do that is by being vulnerable and open and honest and transparent. That's why I typically don't hold things back. And I try to use this moment as, being what they call cathartic, I guess. I'm probably not using the word right. I'm probably not even saying it right. But I know what I'm trying to say. And so, given this brief moment that, I set aside these times to, use this monologue and to communicate, I want to get something of it. I want to get something from it. And sitting here BSing myself about, false realities, about false notions, about false precepts and all those things, it doesn't help me. And nor does I think it's worth your time, right? And so this journey of mine, it has been one of so much value that I try to share it as much as I can with others, because it's one of the things that I have prided myself on, and that's the notion of survival, right? When I think back on my life and my circumstance, and I look at where I came from, and I look at all of the different peers that I used to have at one time, and I look at the different ways that, a lot of them transition, then it's almost like a soldier telling the stories of the war, right? But how do you reconcile that when you weren't necessarily in a war because you were a child, but yet and still the environment that you grew up in, for some, literally statistically, even to this day, you have places in this country that are more hazardous than being on some of the battlefields around the world today, right? In these municipal inner cities. And so coming to a better understanding of my situation, I have become 100% sure that it is beneficial to others because it helps them to reflect a little bit on their own situation. And so politics, right, ended up developing into a passion of mine. And just like any good art, because politics is an art. Politics is not a science. Politics is an art. And one of the reasons why, well, again, I could probably go into that another time, so I won't take the time to go down that rabbit hole since I've already went down a few different rabbit holes. But one of the things why politics is an art is because there is no exact way to determine what people's behaviors can be on the individual level. And for some of us, or for some people, that bothers them. And it bothers them because they have looked to replace what has been a good majority of human experience with something that is artificial in its nature, but yet and still gives people a level of control that has never been achieved before, period. Any time where you can have an operation going 24/7, 7 days a week for years and decades at a time, then you have reached a scale that almost becomes unimaginable for people to try to wrap their heads around. And that has become a threat to the individual, right? And so that was one of the blessings that I had with my experience as a youth, growing up in the chaotic environment that I grew up in. Because everything, for the most part, was individualized. You could not really depend, or at least I couldn't, on a whole, spectrum of people. And the reasons why you couldn't depend on a whole spectrum of people is because you only had a certain few different types of individuals, right? And I've been reading Glenn Lowry, the famed economist from MIT, currently at Brown University, right? I've been reading his book, Late Emissions. And it's a fascinating book because, of course, Glenn is my elder, or my senior, or whatever. Don't want to disrespect Dr. Lowry in any type of way, shape, form, or fashion. But the range of things that Dr. Lowry covers, man, is phenomenal. And the way that he covers it in a way that I can understand, because he talks like the people that I'm familiar with. He brings up stories like the environments that I'm familiar with. And he creates that level of engagement that allows you to learn from him, even if you're not directly in his space, because again, he's being open and he's being honest about it, or at least that's what I perceive. And he sold me on that. And one of the ways that he sold me on that is because, like he always likes to say, warts and all, he just gives it to you. And so seeing that at this point in time in his life, doing a process like this, writing a memoir where he includes some of the things that are definitely not flattering to him, some of the things that I wouldn't have never known, and then double downing on the book with a podcast with his son. It has been one of the most eye-opening and enriching experiences that I've ever had, with the author, because he's still living and breathing. So we definitely should be giving him his flowers now, because what I was saying about the spectrum of different people in your environment, well, that is actually based off of some of Dr. Lowry's work, which he calls social capital. He actually coined the term social capital. And one of the things that Dr. Lowry describes in the notion of social capital is how it's people in an environment that are engaging with each other on a social level, that are helping to transfer and that are allowing for space to be created where people can gain in ways and knowledge, from just the social interaction in itself. And so when you have folks from different types of environments who are able to achieve different levels of success and still maintain a social network, then people who come into those social networks, they automatically profit from it, because the knowledge that you just get from a, off the cuff conversation could probably be far greater than what you could gain, spending 4 years in someone's institution. So it goes back to that old axiom of, it ain't what you know, it's who you know, almost, right? Because if you have a full range of individuals in that spectrum of people who have engaged life and who have achieved success and failures, and you have that wealth to draw from, then the probability of you also being able to be what they call socioeconomic, or to demonstrate what they call socioeconomic mobility, then your chances are enhanced, based off of the social capital that you have to draw from, in your formidable years, right? So that those things should only make sense. And so, again, Glenn Loury, or Dr. Glenn Loury, Professor Glenn Loury, he is providing us all with the opportunity to develop our own social capital for, our peer groups, our loved ones, our neighbors, our friends, by putting himself out there and being open and honest about his life's experiences, considering it has been an incredible body of work. I mean, this guy was one of the first tenured Black professors in economics at Harvard. He went to MIT, studied under Paul Samuelson at MIT, and also studied with George Stigler and all those other greats, coming out of the what they would call skipping my mind right now. It's It's just another term that economists use to describe themselves. Neoclassical school of economics. I believe Glenn Lowry would say he's a neoclassical, and he would also probably use a couple other different titles to describe himself as well. He also considers himself to be a black conservative, which I also consider myself to be a black conservative. And again, it's one of the reasons why I went through this long monologue, describing all different various types of things of my life and my experience, because I find it very interesting and very fascinating that politics has worked in this type of way in my life. And I think that there is a need and that there is a movement that is developing, right before our eyes, seeing more and more folks who describe themselves as black people, black folks, growing in the conservative movement. And I look at it as a positive thing, because again, the way that the politics has developed as of late, and the way that the spectrums have been moving, I think some folks call it a realignment. And Lord knows, from my humble and very novice, mediocre point of view, we need some type of realignment, especially for black people. We need some type of new vision, because the old ways just have not worked. I mean, it becomes, like Jack Cashwell has recently wrote a book. It's called Untenable, right? And he basically talks about how a lot of what we considered to be taking place during the block busting era of, real estate in this country during the, I think like late or early 50s, or late 50s, early 60s, the blockbusting movement, where you had what was called white flight. And, and Mr. Cascio, I think he was even a part of the Housing and Urban Development Agency, or the HUD agency here in Kansas City. And so he has firsthand knowledge of what was taking place on a real time, or in a real way, or in a real sense, because he was there. He had the information, he had the data, and I haven't read this book, but I've just listened to him talk about the book. So it's one of the books that are on my reading list. But he describes something that I had even noticed myself while just studying the real estate environment, doing my senior thesis at UMKC. And that is the evidence that becomes very difficult to ignore, of how resources were not just being taken out of the areas that we now consider to be, areas of concentrated poverty. Resources were not just being taken out by white people. Resources were being taken out by black people as well, which would, of course, only make sense that black people, as well as, white people, would flee the inner city, where a lot of the jobs were disappearing, to move into places in other parts of the city where you had better jobs being offered, which, of course, if you have better jobs being offered and you have those people who can make those type of moves, then that means that you have stable neighborhoods and stable homes, which translates into stable schools and stable education environments, and then on and on and on, you start to see this effect that takes place of what you could consider socioeconomic mobility. And it's not as if that those things were just excluded for white folks, but I am now reaching the end of another great session. Like I said, hey, please drop me a line. Don't forget to like. Don't forget to subscribe to the show. I really appreciate you. The campaign is, it's kicking up. It's kicking up. We don't have a primary, but we're still fighting just as hard as if we did have a primary. So we're focused on November. So I definitely would appreciate your support. So please drop me a line. Don't forget to like. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to share. And brothers and sisters, boys and girls, men and women, until next time.